The relief etching technique that Blake used for most of his Illuminated books was reportedly inspired by his brother Robert, who died in 1787, 2 years prior to Blake publishing the Songs of Innocence. Robert's guidance is reported by J.T. Smith to have been given in a visionary conversation as Blake spoke with his dead brother. Blake, after deeply perplexing himself as to the mode of accomplishing the publication of his illustrated songs without their being subject to the expense of letterpress, his brother Robert stood before him in one of his visionary imaginations, and so decidedly directed him in the way in which he ought to proceed that he immediately followed his advice. Blake later dramatized his indebtedness to Robert in a two-plate sequence from Milton, a poem, in which he and his brother are both represented in a symmetrical pattern in visionary ecstasy. The sequence establishes Robert as a mirror image of Blake and vice versa, which amounts to the same process as the one known as mirror writing or retrography. Of course, both these images were done in relief etching, meaning that both brothers were initially designed in the position of the other. Blake was designed in Robert's posture, while Robert was designed in Blake's. Such reversals are at the center of Blake's practice as an engraver and of his thought. As always with Blake, without contraries is no progression, as he states in the Proverbs of Hell, to the marriage of heaven and hell. Blake is thereby encouraging his readers to cultivate an aesthetics that looks both one way and the other way, engaging with fearful symmetries. In this talk, I examine the practical implications of his commitment to an aesthetics of reversal, that is, his engagement with retrography, the practice of writing and drawing backwards, as you can see on the copper plate from the Songs of Innocence on the right. The text that appears forwards on Blake's plate is the result of a process in which it is written backwards. In being written backwards and then being printed forwards, which is backwards in relation to the way they were created, his words undergo a transfiguration. The same holds true for his pictures, although images are not designed or perceived in the same manner that his words are, which has other consequences on their reversals. Beyond mirror writing, I use the term mirror designing, as designing encompasses all graphic processes, including writing, since Blake treated his text as a design, abolishing the distinction between text and image traditionally at work in engraving and printing. Blake engaged with several engraving techniques during his career, both for pictorial and textual endeavors. The material workings of his craft are explored in several extensive studies, such as Robert Essex' William Blake, Printmaker, Joseph Bascomi's Blake and the Idea of the Book, or Michael Phillips's William Blake, Apprentice and Master. In 2017, Alexander Gourlay published an article following his recreation of Blake's practice, entitled Blake Writes Backwards, specifically on the question of writing. He observes that Blake wrote backwards thanks to three techniques: dry point, intaglio, and relief etching. He explains that relief etching is the method that feels most like writing and drawing naturally, and that as such, it offered the optimal process for Blake to write and design at once, while he mastered other techniques as a designer, but not as a writer. Gourlay's analysis highlights that relief etching is the technique which enabled Blake to combine writing and picturing into the same act of designing. Now, there is a debate as to which tool Blake used for text. For instance, Bascomi argues for a quill, while Gourlay argues for a brush. So I quote, "Although Joseph Bascomi has argued cogently for a quill, suggesting that a brush is suitable only for much larger letters, my experiments with quills and brushes and various resists indicate to me that Blake probably wrote his mature italic relief scripts with a small pointed brush rather than any of the usual writing tools." The uncertainty as to the tool Blake used is echoed in the title page to the Book of Urizen, where Urizen is holding a designing instrument in each hand, whose nature is unclear, especially as these instruments vary in length and width, depending on the copy. So I've given you two examples on the slide, and you can see that the instruments vary somewhat. The Blake Archive illustration description states the instruments may be quills, graphite pencils, or etching needles. The indeterminacy of Urizin's tools parallels Blake's, but Urisin here mostly parallels Blake as one who engages in a dual practice, symbolized by his double-handedness as a crafter of words and figures. The dual direction of Urizin's hands also alludes to the way in which Blake's designs change direction. So the aim of this talk is not to contribute to the research on the material conditions of mirror writing. My interest lies in the result of this process. I focus on the reversal at the heart of Blake's retrographic practice. I examine places where Blake draws attention to this reversal by making it visible, creating unstable designs, and challenging the reader's perception. I will first talk about words appearing backwards, then about images appearing backwards, and I'll finish with a reflection on images pointing both ways, where I take up Mitchell's idea of multi-stable images in picture theory. So first of all, words. The vast majority of the text in the Illuminated books appears forwards for the reader, which means Blake wrote it backwards. However, there are a few plates which feature text that appears backwards to the reader, meaning Blake wrote it forwards. Put differently, these words appear transgressive on the printed page, but not on the copper plate. I examined two instances to probe their function in the books. My first example is from plate 30 of Milton, which is the opening plate of the second book. The top section of the plate is taken by its title and by a design featuring distressed running female figures at the bottom and falling male figures amidst a dark, thundery sky. The scene may be that of the apocalypse, or it may be Beulah, where the sons and daughters of Oleron are indicated to descend in the lines below the design. At the top of the sky, a sentence is written in reverse in a cloud. So on this next slide, you have the text that appears backwards. Here, it appears forwards on the right. How wide the gulf and unpassable between simplicity and insipidity. The inscription appearing within a thundercloud evokes the character's failure to acknowledge the truth of this statement, as it is literally obscured from them. It also suggests imminent punishment, evocative of the Last Judgment, except Blake upsets the traditional iconography where the just ascend on the left and the damned descend on the right, since here we have a character falling on the left, and on the right we have one character falling and another apparently ascending. So it really changes the traditional layout of the Last Judgment. There is a second case of retrography in this design below the title Milton, but above the inscription Book the Second. Another inscription in reverse reads, "Contraries are positives, a negation is not a contrary." Blake is here forcing his readers into an effort of perception, which ties in with the idea that without contraries is no progression, warning us that two ways need to be considered and not just one way at the expense of the other. And indeed, on this design, there's a lot of text that appears, and some of it is forwards and some of it is backwards. The notion of Blake and contraries lends itself particularly well to this type of reversal. In Blake's thought, contraries are necessary to each other. Contrarily to negations, they do not cancel each other out, but exist in active dynamism. In a sense, contraries offer a conceptual image of Blake's process of mirror writing, signaling the interdependence of opposites, here substantialized in the act of mirror writing. My second example is plate 37 of Jerusalem, whose top half displays normally written text and whose bottom half displays a design which shows a gigantic crouched male figure sleeping with his head buried in a book by the shore. The posture is Eurozenic, but the sleeping position and the presence of the shore point to Albion locked in deadly sleep during the poem. To the left, there is an open scroll with a small male figure sitting on the furled section, so I've zoomed in on the right, with a pen in his hand. The scroll features mirror writing, which the small male figure must have written. Viscomi interprets the small male figure as a self-portrait of Blake etching his books. Because the printed image mirrors the plate image, Blake rewrote his text backwards, an art his friends acknowledge he excelled in, and which he pictures himself doing in Jerusalem plate 37. The text on the scroll reads as follows when put forwards. Each man is in his spectre's power until the arrival of that hour when his humanity awake and cast his spectre into the lake. These lines designate the giant as the embodiment of each man, therefore Albion, asleep under the power of his spectre. The fact that the text is written in reverse may be a comment on the failure of vision on Albion's part. He is not perceptive enough for the words to be legible. The words being backwards may also suggest that Albion is backwards and needs to operate a reversal in order to awake to vision from the spectre's power to humanity. Alternatively, Blake may have wanted to put the reader in his position as an engraver by showing them what he had under his eyes as he worked on his books. Let us note here that though the text appears backwards, it is still decipherable. When Blake doesn't want his text to be decipherable, he uses more drastic methods. Let us briefly mention the hieroglyphs in Urizin's book, in the Book of Urizin. So that's the image on the left, which is from copy G. Or the gibberish written in mock Hebrew on Urizin's stone tablets in Milton. So that's the image on the right. Or still another example is the scratched out words from Blake's address to the public in Jerusalem. These, I think, are the equivalent of what a negation is. Conversely, the text printed backwards is a contrary, which forces the reader into active reading to reverse their paradigm of vision. The retrographic text visible on the plate asks the reader to rethink their relation to Blake's forms entirely, not just the words visible on the page, but also the entire designs. Right. No, that's a spoiler, sorry. So designs now. Blake does not only write in reverse, but draws his designs in reverse too. The implications are seemingly less subversive. An image, even in reverse, is still identifiable. However, depending on the orientation of the figures designed, the semiotic implications may vary. For instance, because of the Western practice of reading from left to right, a figure looking towards the right is likelier to be interpreted as looking towards the future, while a figure looking towards the left is interpreted as reflecting on the past. Like all engravers, Blake designed his images with the desired orientation in mind, but he also spent a lot of time etching his plates, looking at the opposite of the desired result, which must have impacted the way he conceived his images and led him to cultivate a double orientation, so a set of contraries, if you will. The reversal invites us to look at images the other way around, the way Blake would have seen them when designing. For instance, the infamous cock-headed man sitting gloomily at the right of the design while looking at a seemingly setting sun on the left on plate 78 of Jerusalem may be interpreted as an era contemplating its end. The sun's position on the left, alluding to the sun setting in the west, reinforces that idea. However, the design takes on an opposite meaning when switched around, as suddenly the cock-headed man would be on the left, looking over a sun on the right, which would be interpreted as the sun rising in the east, literally at cockcrow, which echoes the image fruitfully. In that sense, the figure would not be contemplating the end of an era, but a new dawn. Blake seems to leave both readings open. An interesting place to look when comparing the orientation of Blake's figures is his reuse of designs previously etched or sketched. The manuscript of the Four Zoas is a treasure trove, as it features many sketches of similar designs etched in Blake's illuminated books. For instance, the printed design of the distressed, lost, and enitharment finding Orc outstretched on a rock on plate 3 of America shows Orc on the left and the parents on the right, while a similar sketched design on plate 62 of the Zoas shows Lost and enitharment on the left and Orc on the right. The design also appears at the top of the page in America and at the bottom of the page in other 4 Zoas. Since the former is printed and the latter sketched, this means that Blake would have designed them both with Lost and enitharment on the left and Orc on the right. Likewise, same kind of case, the design of Enion blindly groping her way towards her children, Lost and enitharment, appears in sketch form in the Zoas, with Enion facing left towards her children on the left, while the printed design in Jerusalem shows Enion facing right towards her children on the right. In both cases, Blake designed Enion facing left, though the results are different. Similarly, plate 81 of Jerusalem shows Gwendolen speaking to Campbell while hiding her hand behind her back, which the poem explains to be her way of hiding a lie. I quote, "So saying, she took a falsehood and hid it in her left hand. Forgetting that falsehood is prophetic, she hid her hand behind her, upon her back and behind her loins, and thus uttered her deceit." End quote. Gwendolen faces right at Campbell, hiding her left hand behind her, as is told in the poem. Yet a similar sketch appears on page 37 of the Zoas with a female figure in the same position as Gwendolen. She is on the right, facing another female figure, possibly Campbell, on the left. So far so good, the orientation matches that which was printed in Jerusalem. However, the sketch version of Gwendolen from the Zoas hides both arms behind her back. Yes, the text of Jerusalem indicates that Gwendolen hides her left hand, which is the case in the design of Jerusalem, though not of the Zoas. Moreover, in the design from Jerusalem, Gwendolen is pointing to text written in reverse in a cloud. The text appearing backwards aligns with the theme of deceit and with Gwendolen's attempt at obscuring revelation by telling a falsehood. So the examples seen so far suggest Blake produced these designs the same way around for the most part, and only the result is different. However, other images which Blake reproduces stay oriented the same whether they are sketched or printed. For instance, the printed design of Urizen holding a sphere while striding towards the right on plate 23 of the Book of Urizen reappears with a sketch of Urizen in the same process, oriented the same way, on page 74 of the Zoas. Moreover, there are similar designs that appear in printed form in several books and which are oriented differently depending on the book. For example, the design of London as an old man being led by a child is oriented right in the London poem from the Songs, while on plate 84 of Jerusalem, the old man and the child are heading left. The image also appears at the bottom instead of at the top, adding a vertical reversal of sorts to the horizontal reversal. This suggests Blake was interested in testing the same vision the other way around rather than repeating it. There are also instances of Blake using twin designs in the same work, showing visual processes of mirroring. When featured on the same plate, this mirroring dramatizes the tension between opposites. In Jerusalem, there are two arresting examples: a horizontal mirroring involving two angels and a couple embracing, that's the plate on the left, and a vertical mirroring involving the man reading the scroll at the top and the man reading the book at the bottom of the plate on the right. Blake also creates mirror effects involving separate plates, as is the case in the mirror sequence between him and Robert in Milton, which I mentioned earlier, and which establishes a connection between the brothers despite their separation in life and death. A more puzzling example is the final union between Albion and Jerusalem, visually represented twice in the last plates of Jerusalem. The implications of this double union and what they mean in each case have been extensively commented on. I will not go into that here. What I'm interested in is that by forcing the reader to interpret them against each other, these images also foster a reading practice in which the reader questions every image. I would argue that the presence of twin designs invites the reader not only to interpret each design in relation to each other in a dynamic face-off, but also to challenge the meaning of each design individually, even if it has no visible counterpoint. So this leads me to my final point, which is multi-stable images. The unstable dynamics of mirroring invites us to look at images the other way around, even when Blake does not reverse them. An example is the cock-headed man gazing at a setting sun in Jerusalem, who can be interpreted as an era contemplating its end. This is the image in the middle. And turned around, it becomes the image of a new dawn. In picture theory, Mitchell theorizes multi-stable images, by which he means images which represent several things at once, depending on how one looks at them, which are theoretically irreconcilable, such as the Necker cube on the left or the rabbit duck illusion on the right. The centrality of reversal in Blake's aesthetics asserts all his images as multi-stable images, encouraging a disorderly reading of his designs. I want to pause on one example to highlight the intricate dynamics of reversal, requiring the same mental reversal as reading Blake's retrographic text. My reading concerns the sketch on plate 46 of the Four Zoas, which depicts Tharmas on the right, helplessly trying to catch Enyon as she dissolves in water on the left. The design shows her carried by a wave. The text states that she disappears in a shower of falling tears. I quote, image of grief. This is Tharmas speaking at this point. Image of grief. Thy fading lineaments make my eyelids fail. What have I done? Both rage and mercy are alike to me. Looking upon thee, image of faint waters, I recoil from my fierce rage into thy semblance. Enyon, return. Why does thy piteous face vanish like a raining cloud, melting, a shower of falling tears, nothing but tears, Enyon, substanceless, voiceless, weeping, banished, nothing but tears, Enyon, art thou forever banished from the watery eyes of Tharmas? End quote. Given the proximity between the text on plates 44, 45 and the design on plate 46 and the water imagery that appears in them both, there is no doubt that this design provides an illustration of sorts of these lines. However, if we turn the design around, we may interpret it as the illustration of a later event, which directly mirrors the disappearance of Enyon as it is the moment of her reappearance. What motivates this reading is that the text reuses the same materials to narrate Enyon's coming back to life. A few lines above the last passage, with Enyon dissolving in tears, her counterpart Tharmas was described as emerging from the smoke out of a dolorous groan with a rattling of bones. This is the second quote at the bottom of this slide. But from the dolorous groan, one like a shadow of smoke appeared, and human bones rattling together in the smoke and stamping. End quote. The same dolorous groan, rattling of bones, and the same tear imagery reappear when Enyon is resurrected at the end of the poem. And when morning began to dawn upon the distant hills, a whirlwind rose up in the center, and in the whirlwind a shriek, and in the shriek a rattling of bones, and in the rattling of bones a dolorous groan, and from the dolorous groan and tears rose Enyon like a gentle light, and Enyon spoke, saying, O dreams of death, the human form dissolving company by beasts and worms and creeping things in darkness and despair. The clouds fall off from my wet brow, the dust from my cool limbs. Into the sea of Tharmas, soon renewed, a golden moth. I shall cast off my death clothes and embrace Tharmas again. Now, a lot of words in Agnon's reappearance echo not only the moment of her disappearance, but words and events that occurred in the 2 pages before her disappearance. The whirlwind echoes the crash, the shriek echoes Tharmas's cries, and we have, of course, word for word, the rattling of bones, the dolorous groan, and the tears. Agnon seems to reappear through the same watery phenomenon that formerly erased her. Therefore, if turned around, the design may be interpreted as Tharmas reaching out to Agnon as she reappears, greeting her. Indeed, the mirroring use of tears in the text suggests that if words can be turned around to have an opposite meaning, images can too, in a process of semiotic transfiguration. Let us note that this is far from the only instance in which tears take on a multi-stable meaning in Blake's works. Tears display a multiple array of emotions, but the most synthetic reversal operated by tears is performed in this proverb of hell. Excess of sorrow laughs, excess of joy weeps. This is exactly what the design with Tharmas and Agnon does, I think. Now, to conclude, Blake's engagement with mirroring demonstrates a desire not only to deconstruct forms and reconstruct them, but a desire to put forth a total questioning of the way forms function. In the lines narrating Agnon's disappearance, her body was described as fading lineaments. Ultimately, this is what Blake's designs are. Whether text or image, they are lines, they are lineaments. Blake expresses an ambivalent view as to the direction his lines are supposed to follow. In The Marriage, he advocates a swinging motion with swerving lines, preferring crooked roads over straight roads. Improvement makes straight roads, but the crooked roads without improvement are roads of genius. Yet in the descriptive catalogue, he praises the wiry line of rectitude. The two assertions are hard to reconcile, but so are Blake's fearful symmetrical images. Both assertions hold true for Blake's art, which simultaneously cultivates an aesthetics of rectitude and crookedness. The forwards result, after all, can only be attained by first designing it backwards with relief etching. So backwards and forwards are interdependent, as are contraries. An inscription by Blake encapsulates this multi-stable cognitive process. In copy B of the small book of designs, the image of Urizen writing or designing in his book bears an inscription that asks, which is the way, the right or the left? The answer, evidently, is both. Thank you very much for listening to me.